I'm going to go ahead. Okay, well, I'm David, and this is my presentation on concentrated solar power. And just if either you don't remember from my project last year, or you weren't here for my project last year, just in a general definition, concentrated solar power is a system of generating power by concentrating the sun's energy and converting it to high temperature heat. And this is done through two different means, the number one being reflection. That's really what I look most into, using mirrors to accomplish this, or refraction, using a transparent lens. My rationale for this, just sort of, I have an interest in alternative energy and environmental issues. And to a certain extent, this stems from previous research that I've done, especially into the climate change issue. Essentially, I concluded there is a need for developing alternative fuels. And then also from my Culminating project last year. I was very interested in the topic, but also in improving on the product that I created last year. The nature of my research, the research question was, how can thermal energy produced by concentrated solar power be used for practical application? And I had chosen to use a parabolic dish design, especially due to the research I did last year. Well, last year I did more sort of a comparative study of many different types of designs. This year I really focused it on this one particular model. And it differs from my previous research because I was looking at practical applications of this technology. Whereas last year my product was more sort of a proof of concept, just to put, okay, you can concentrate solar energy and create power using that. This year, how do we use this for practical applications, and what aspects are important in this? The first aspect that I felt was important was heat retention and transfer. And the key component of this was receiver design. The receiver is the central part of the dish. I guess in some of the pictures, the original one is kind of a red color on mine. It's where all the light is focused. And really, at this point, it's where you get all this solar radiation is converted into heat. And you want to do this efficiently through a number of different ways. You want to minimize the size of the receiver because the smaller the surface area, the less heat that's going to radiate away. You want to have a lot of non-conductive materials around the receiver so that it doesn't conduct through the frame of the dish away from the receiver. And then you also want to, the next bullet here is design a heat exchange system that's effective. Basically, you want to be able to take the heat from the receiver where it's all bottled up in there, and using a fluid and take it away from that receiver to where it's useful, either to some sort of form of thermal storage or for power generation. And the last bullet is thermal storage. One of the greatest advantages of thermal applications of concentrated solar power is that you can store the heated fluid underground overnight, or while the sun isn't shining. And this is a huge advantage over a lot of other alternatives, especially photovoltaics. Photovoltaic cells, the solar panels that you're most used to seeing, they create direct electrical current, and this has to be stored in a battery. And sort of the analogy that's used is you can store just as much energy in a $5 thermos thermally as you can in a $150 laptop battery. And so one of the greatest advantages of this technology is you can store energy more cheaply. Solar tracking. I did a lot of research into how do we modify these satellite dishes, which is what I made my product from, to track the sun. Different commercial products that are available for sensors and actuators, that kind of thing. Power generation through basically two different means. Your most classic, your steam power turbine. The fluid that's created that runs through the system is used to create steam, which powers the turbine, which creates power. Or another sort of thing, Shasta had mentioned this in her project on artificial hearts, is use of a Stirling engine, which basically uses an external power source, external heat source to power the engine as opposed to an internal combustion engine, which is also extremely efficient. And then, so the last aspect that I researched into was commercial application. And I focused on a couple of important commercial applications of concentrated solar power. First of all, with Desertec. This is a project that's being proposed to develop North Africa and Middle East for solar potential and then export this power to Europe. It's a massive undertaking. A lot of interesting sort of political aspects to this issue, and you have a lot of the turmoil in the Middle East and North Africa that's relevant to this. A lot of environmental issues with building these massive transmission lines across the Mediterranean. And so there's a lot of different interesting trade-offs for that project. And then also use in the developing world. While Desertec is in the developing world, it's export-based. But I was also interested in solar water disinfection. Basically, it's a very crude approximation of concentrated solar power where we use a sort of a corrugated metal and plastic bottles, and we use the interaction between the concentrated sunlight and the plastic in the bottles to purify water. And this sort of ties into a parallel presentation I did for William and Mary, where I was talking about how we would design mid-scale, community-centered concentrated solar power systems for use in the developing world. There we go. All right. This is my product. It was a point focus in parabolic dish. The base for it was a 10-foot C-band satellite dish with a mylar mirror surface, which is the reflective surface you see in there. And really what I was going for with this product was to focus on practical application, and this was heating a volume of water. You say, oh, well, you know, what's practical about heating a volume of water? But this is representative. A lot of what's done is basically you heat some sort of fluid, and this transfer fluid is used to do any number of different things, whether you use the fluid itself for hot water for solar water heating, or use it for power generation, or you store it for later use. A lot of what I did to start the product was scouting. And sort of the recommendation of Mr. Morris is that I go around some of the more rural parts of this county and look for someone who would allow me to take down their satellite dish. And this one we found, and we took it down. And a huge thanks to Bob and Mark for helping me take it down. There's no way I would be able to get it down without you guys.
Did you get caught?
An interesting thing about this picture, you'll miss. You notice there's like a section missing of it, and you'll see it in the final product. The previous owner hit it with a tractor, and so we cut those parts out. So that's why that's missing. And then once I had this dish transferred to my house, sort of installed it and applied Mylar to the surface. And this is sort of a general idea what the original receiver and pump design looked like. On the right, we have, it's just my quote-unquote thermal storage is a bucket of water with a sump pump, and I'm pumping water up to the top of the dish to the receiver, where it circulates through the receiver, and it's supposed to heat it up, and then it pump back down back to the bucket, so it's circulating through the system. The original receiver design was problematic for a number of different reasons. The biggest one was alignment. I had sort of relied on the original dish for the alignment for the location of the focal point, and I'm not quite sure why, but either because of damage to the dish, maybe when it was hit, or that maybe it was aligned improperly when it was first installed. The focal point actually ended up being a couple inches behind the receiver. So we're supposed to be striking where the red lines are crossing at the front end of the receiver. It's actually striking behind it, and it's set the tubing on fire. And also problems with leaking. Is the closed system. I had used portions of the original electronic receiver to do this, and it wasn't really as watertight as it really needed to be, and especially with the water pressure, as you start pumping it out, so blowing out of those. Okay. My second receiver design, this is a picture of it. I used a teapot. So okay, well, it's innately, it's made to withstand heat, and it's waterproof. And so this improved system was more successful. I also moved moved the receiver back to match the focal point, so it's actually hitting it where it's supposed to. You can see in the picture on the left. Solar tracking. Although it was a very important part of my research, I did not incorporate solar tracking into the final product. And there's a couple different reasons, but cost really is the #1 reason. Even though this is a permanent structure, like I built it in my yard and it's been there for the past 3 weeks, it's temporary in the sense I'm going to have to take it down, and the solar tracking equipment would be pretty expensive with both of the sensors I need, and then you need 2 actuators. I would have to replace the one that was in the original dish. And I didn't really feel like that was cost effective for my purposes. And then also damage to the mount. The original mount that I used from the satellite dish didn't have the degree of freedom that I really needed to track the sun. It is meant for receiving television signals. And so I actually had to make a lot of changes to the mount that would have damaged it. It would have made it, I wouldn't be able to use the commercial tracking device. Application of research. The nature of the design, especially versus what I built last year, this is a picture, the one I built this year versus what I built last year, has a couple of important changes that sort of going towards approaching a greater degree of practicality and efficiency. The parabolic dish design versus the Fresnel approximation. The parabolic dish is sort of the more ideal shape, whereas the Fresnel approximation, which is where you have these different panels that sort of approximate the slope of the parabolic dish at different points, is less ideal. The solar furnace versus heat exchange system, what I built last year, basically was just built to burn things. Versus this year, the heat exchange system, the idea was to be able to put it in practical application and take heat away from the system. The collector size, especially with large economies of scale, the larger you get, it becomes more efficient, ideally. So as you increase the collector size, ideally greater degree of efficiency. And also temporary versus permanent structure. What I built last year was very temporary. I could take it down and bring it back inside. Versus the permanent structure I built this year, a lot of different issues that I had to deal with something that's permanently outside. And tracking, even though I didn't incorporate it in the final product, it was a very much a consideration when I was first putting the product together, and an important part of my research. And even though it would have been difficult to incorporate the tracking devices into this product, it would still be possible and a lot better to implement, and is more designed to accommodate that. My general conclusion is the concentrator worked, but it was an ineffective means of heating the water. And there's a number of different reasons for this. The biggest one was location. In sort of a big general geographic sense, this is not really an ideal place to build a solar concentrator. I built one here because I'm interested in them, but because we're on high latitude, especially because of the climate, these systems are really best built in hot, desert, arid, dry areas. Also sort of a topographic location. I built it in the portion of my yard, and I did some observations to pull this off, but where it got the most sunlight throughout the day. However, especially because of the tree line and other sort of like situational factors, there's a very limited amount of time where you get direct solar radiation that can be useful for this dish. And then that was an issue. Mirror surface quality, especially again, built near the tree line, a lot of issues with wildlife and trees, pollen, that kind of thing. You don't really think about this, but if something like this, the mirror surface will degrade after it sits out there for a long period of time. And this is also an important issue with commercial applications, especially in hot, arid areas where you have to clean the dishes. Is a huge water use issue in these hot areas. And here, not an ideal place where you have the pollen on the dish, that kind of thing. And then also issues with heat loss. And this is really the #1 reason why it didn't work. Even though a lot of heat was generated in the receiver, most of it was not being transferred to the fluid like it was supposed to be. It was mostly being dissipated either through the actual framework of the dish itself, or again, being radiated out or reflected out. You can see that in the pictures. Even though I tried to darken the receiver as much as possible, instead you lose a lot of efficiency that way. And also just because a lot of the time it just didn't transfer the fluid like it was supposed to. Sort of a general idea of how I can reduce this heat loss is to maybe possibly reduce the volume of water I was using. Try to use a smaller volume so it would be less heated up. Although I'm finished with my culminating, I'll continue to work to improve the concentrator this summer. I think it's interesting and something to do, I guess, right? Potential topics for further research include greater depth in other types of concentrators, greater depth in a commercial application. Especially interested in some of the work I did for William Mary, who was talking about applications in developing countries, and topics in design, in different comparative types of designs. My work cited.